street level outreach in Portland area, we would ask participants to identify for themselves where they were on a scale, because then when we checked in with them later, is it improving, is it going bad? We knew sort of which area of their life they wanted to focus on, and they could decide that for themselves. But what is your access to healthy food on a regular basis? Good, bad, indifferent. What is your access to like safe housing? Right, it's not just do you have somewhere to sleep, because sure, I have somewhere to sleep. It's not safe. My choice is either in a home where domestic abuse is happening or on the street. And so between those two choices, what do I pick? And so do you have access to somewhere safe to stay on a regular basis? Do you feel safe in your own environment? Do you have friends that you can call on when you need help? Are there people that are there? Do you have access to health care on a regular basis? Do you have transportation to get to the store, to get food or vitamins or medicine? These are all sort of like errands or normal things, if people would say, but if you start to eliminate some of those in any individual's life, it begins to have impact on other areas of their life. Their social determinants, these are interactions with people, are actually impacting their health. And case study is actually showing increased effect on heart, like lively, like actual, like body physical health, not just like, oh, you're on the street, poor you, like your health is actually degrading the lower your numbers are in the social determinants of health. And so these are all of the things that we sort of picked and identified would be identified as an issue in a social determinant of health for someone's well-being. So with that, the social determinant of health, do you have access to affordable housing? Do you have access to safe housing, shelter? We're going to invite Jason Scales up. You looked at me, I'm saying your name right. Okay. You just looked at me every time I said it, and I thought, gosh, am I getting it wrong? I did last time. All right. Welcome. Come on up.
All right. Thank you for having me tonight. As we've said a number of times, and I guess I've looked up every time, my name is Jason Scales. I'm the executive director at LASA. And for those of you who don't know what LASA is, LASA, we're a nonprofit organization here in Lakewood, just off Gravelly Lake Drive, about, I think, 5 minutes away from here, maybe less. And we really work in the affordable housing and homelessness space. So just a quick 2-minute or less history of LASA. LASA was actually founded by a number of local churches in Lakewood back in the late 80s with the idea of we see a lot of people struggling with housing. They got together. By 1993, they'd created a shelter program, and off LASA went. So again, a little just brief on LASA, what we do. We own, operate, and develop affordable housing units. We help people find and stay housed through a number of different ways. And then we have our client service center, which people who are experiencing homelessness can get showers, laundry, a safe and stable place to hang out during the day, get some food, which we will talk more about how they get there during this presentation. So, if you haven't noticed, Pierce County has a housing crisis in a lot of fundamental ways. So, Pierce County, so unincorporated Pierce County, we're not talking Pierce County including the city of Tacoma or even including the city of Lakewood, just Pierce County kind of without the major metropolitan areas. By 2044 needs to build 32,000 new living units to keep housing affordable. 32,000. So, you're going to hear a lot of numbers. That's about 1,600 a year. In our very best year in the last 5 years, it's like 1,100 is what we've done. So every year, we probably, on a good year, we're falling 500 behind. And quite frankly, with the way interest rates are going and all those kinds of things, there's not a lot of development going on right now. So we're probably falling farther behind. The city of Lakewood, in that same 20-year span, needs to develop 9,400 new housing units in the next 20 years, which is about 470 per year. In the last 13 years, Lakewood has developed 1,200 housing units total. So we need to do 900 a year, which is basically what the city of Lakewood does in a decade, right? And so I know Lakewood's doing a lot lately. I mean, the town center, we all see that going, which is actually going now. But over the past 10 years, Pierce County as a whole, we're probably short 13,000 living units, right? That's what we've fallen behind. And so as we talk more about this, as we go through this, why housing costs a lot, whether it's a new home or you're trying to buy a home, which we'll talk about, or you're trying to move into an apartment, why it costs a lot is a basic economic issue, supply and demand. There are not enough houses and not enough living units for the people who want to live in those units, right? And so it is, I would say, and I've been doing this long enough now, I'm not sure who could convince me otherwise, I'll be honest about this. Housing costs are why there's a homelessness issue in Pierce County. And really everywhere else. So, some other facts about this. All right, so in a perfect world, as a person, somewhere around 30% of your income should go to housing, right? So if you make $1,000 a month, hopefully your rent is $300 a month, right? If you make $10,000 a month, your rent or your mortgage could be $3,000 a month, right? To be financially secure, to not live paycheck to paycheck, you need to what you're paying for housing needs to be about 30% of your income. All right? In Pierce County, 100,000 households do not meet that. They do not meet that goal of 30% of that. 100,000 households. In fact, over 40,000 households spend at least 50% of their income on housing. At least 50% of their income on housing, which does not leave a lot of money for other stuff. All right, so from 2015 to 2021, all right, this first one's a good one. Income went up, the average income went up 59%. 59%. And this data is a little old, and I'll say this, trying to get these numbers when the government shut down was not easy, which is why they're a little old. So income went up about 60%. Rent went up about 80%. Home prices went up 103%. With that being said, for home prices have gone up almost an additional 20% since COVID, right? Since COVID, they're almost up another 20%. So if you don't own a home, good luck. I used to joke with my wife, because she thinks our son's going to live with us forever. And I'm like, no, he's not. And now, doing this work, I'm like, yeah, he is. He's living with us forever. We're going to die, and he can have the house. That's the way it's going to happen. So, for rent in the city of Lakewood, a studio apartment, no bedrooms, just one nice room. Can anybody guess what it costs an average studio apartment? $1,100. For one room, $1,100 a month, which means if you want to move into that unit, you got to come up with over $3,000 just to move in. Just to move in. A one bedroom is about $1,300. About $1,300. That means to move in, if you want to move into a one bedroom, you've got to come up with $3,900 before you can move in, before a landlord will talk to you. A two bedroom is about $1,600. Right, so you're looking at a little less than $5,000 to move in. A little less than $5,000 to move in, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the high moving costs. And I will say this, Lakewood's fairly reasonable for the rest of the county. It's fairly reasonable. Tacoma, some other areas, much more expensive. Average home costs in Lakewood, can anybody guess? $500,000 is what an average home in Lakewood costs. All right? Now, if you want to buy a home in Lakewood. That means if you're traditional, right, you put 20% down, you get your 30-year mortgage, right? So right now today, that means you've got to come up with $100,000 to buy a home. $100,000, all right? And you're still paying almost $2,800 a month for the next 30 years. Which, quite frankly, is a good deal when you think about what rent's going to be in about 5 years, the rate we're going. So those are just some basic numbers on that and why it is so hard to find and maintain housing. It is, I am a lucky person that I bought a home, literally probably the last person to buy a home before COVID. When we closed on our house, the person who came to sign the papers on the closing, it was the first time they did an in-home thing because of COVID. We're like literally the first. Actually, Devin it was a week after we shut Reach down for COVID. My house, I can no longer afford. It has gone up a lot. But if I took all that money, went next door, sold it, and bought the house next door, my mortgage would go up almost $1,200 a month. Almost $1,200 a month. And I, in a lot of ways, on paper, am very house rich. But I can no longer afford my next door neighbor's house. So it's just something to think about. All right, so with those astronomical housing costs, what we've seen in Pierce County and what a lot of urban places see throughout this country is we see a lot of people falling into homelessness. And there are a lot of paths to the way we see it. It's not, if you go to the town center, right, if you go to the Ram, there's always the guy at the bus stop there. There's a couple people who stay in the park by LASA, and we at LASA, we'll talk more about, we see a lot of people coming into our organization, but it is an issue that we see every day. It's a tough issue, I think, and it's an issue a lot that's on our mind because we can see it so vividly every day if we go to certain parts of the county. So how people fall into homelessness. The first thing is just housing costs. Housing costs a lot. And if you have one bad day, it can be a loss of your job. When, for example, locally tariffs happened, right? And the high tariffs on China, and there was an Amazon warehouse over in Woodbrook, right? They shut the whole warehouse down because that warehouse was specifically and only for products from China, which were all sitting in a boat out in the Pacific Ocean. They laid everybody off. A number of those people lost their housing because they are, like many of us, paycheck to paycheck. They missed 2 paychecks. Eviction went out. Some of them I know didn't want to get evicted, and so they're like, I'll walk away, right? But that high cost has led to nobody having savings. You lose your job. There you go. Again, when housing costs a lot, we talked a little bit about the health care. One bad health emergency, right? The debt that you get from that and the payment you have to make for that causes problems, and then you can fall into rental increases. I have a wonderful staff member who lived in a place for 10 years, didn't have any problems. Landlord sold, lease was up, rent went up, $900 a month. She's out. She's like, I cannot afford that. She also says, I also can't afford the almost $5,000 to get to the place I want, right? She stayed with family and friends for a couple months before she could move in, to save the money to move in, right? So domestic violence also leads to homelessness. When the person who is in the home abuses somebody, that sometimes you just have to get out and you don't have a lot of money or a place to go. And then addiction and mental health can lead to homelessness, which for a reason is the one I put on here last. That's the one, if you watch the news, that's why people are homeless, right? Because they're addicted to drugs, because they have mental health issues. That's why they live on the street. And I will say this, what we find at LASA and what I found over 20 years of being in this business is people do not fall into homelessness because they are addicted to something. They became addicted because they lived on the streets for 6 months, 9 months, a year, 18 months, right? When I have a bad day at work, sometimes, right? Some of us, we may go home and may have a drink. We may self-medicate a little bit, right? We may say, you know, I remember my wife used to say, hey, I used to call on my way home, and I used to say, how's it going? She goes, we're going to go get margaritas tonight, right? But the nice thing for us is we'd go have our margarita, we'd go home, we'd fall asleep in a nice, comfortable bed. It would be great. When you say, I've had a rough day, I'm getting a margarita, and then you go sleep when it's 32 degrees and raining in your car, and you don't sleep well, the next night you're going to need at least another margarita to get through it, right? And so what we see is the vast majority of people that we work with, and that I think most other providers that we partner with and people we know, as people fall into homelessness, have jobs. You'd be shocked at the number of who access services who have jobs. We're looking at probably 80% of the families and individuals we work with have jobs, right? Do they become addicted to substances? Yes. Is it because they lived in a tent or in their car for 9 months? Yeah, it is. And it's a shame, but we all have to deal with the way we have to deal with it. And I get it. It's a hard place to be. All right. So homeless data for 2025 in Pierce County. Each January, we do what they call point-in-time count, where one day, 24-hour period, we go out and we count all the people we know who are living on the streets. I would say it's probably undercounted. The person who runs it is sitting in the front row, so she would probably say she tells me all the time it's undercounted. It also only counts people who are literally, what the phrase is, literally homeless, living in their car, living on the street, living in a shelter. It doesn't talk about the family who's staying for 2 days with their cousin's boyfriend, or the person who's like staying with their friend who's got, you can stay here for 1 week, right? Technically, the government would not consider you homeless, even though you got a place to stay for maybe 3 days, right? And you don't know where you're staying after that. So anyway, what we looked at, what that in 2025 worked out to be was about 3,000 people. It's about 3,000 people. A little more than half were staying in shelters, and the other half somewhere in a car on the street, somewhere like that. Now, that is a big number to me, but an even bigger number is that in 2025, we have a system that people call in and say, I'm homeless, I need assistance, right, in Pierce County. I won't bore you with the name and all that, but we have a system. In 2025, 17,500 people accessed that system and called in. Now, some of them were, I'm about to lose my house, I'll be honest, right? We work with people, they're like, I'm out in a week, and we're like, call this number, right? So it's not everybody's homeless in that, but at least 17,500 people are homeless or on the brink of homelessness in 2025 in Pierce County. Now, not great thing, but we as a system then of people that work in this, like LASA and other organizations in there, we can help about, 3,000 people a year? About 3,000 people a year get assistance through a nonprofit in terms of shelter, in terms of, helping maybe subsidize housing and all that for them in a year. And so one of the things like we hear all the time is, you're not doing any good because there's still people out there. We're giving you all this money, and there's still people out there. Well, when you have money to help 3,000 a year, and 17,000 people want help or need help, that's the problem. Like it's a losing battle, right? It's not going to be won with the way we are now. But last year, through those programs, almost 1,400 people found housing, and I think this is a number. It's a good number. I think it shocks some people sometimes. About 84% of those people never come back in the system. So once they get housed, they're there. They're not coming back into that system. So there you go. Now, every Friday, I go to a meeting. Every Friday, I get an email. Every Friday, my poor wife gets a text. I'm like, here's the number this week. And she's like, why do you text me this number? I do not need to know this on a Friday. Families who are looking for shelter, right? So this was this last Friday, 107 families needed shelter. That's a total of 215 children who did not have a place to stay on Friday. There's some singles there as well. But if you're a single person, male or female, it's much less difficult to find temporary housing than it is a family, right? And so it's space and resources to house a family. You can put 150 beds, in a space much bigger than this for individuals, but for families, you need kind of a separate living unit and stuff like that. So anyway, there's your fun, depressing fact for the day. 215 children unhoused on Friday. So in Pierce County, the primary cause of homelessness, which I'm going to say as we go through this, a number of these really are affordable housing on here. So the number one cause was a family crisis or breakup, which happens a lot of times. It's especially prominent with youth, right? I had a fight with my parents. They kicked me out. I have nowhere to go. I came out to my parents. They got mad. I have nowhere to go. That's a very high number of that. I used to work in youth, and that seemed to happen about 3 times a week. We got that call. Eviction is 17%. Where eviction, that's, again, probably high price of rent. Domestic violence is 16%. Loss of a job is 16%. No affordable housing is 16%. That is, loss of job, no affordable housing, eviction. They're, to me, all the same thing. Substance abuse and mental health, the ones that get mentioned all the time. This is why we have a housing problem, is people use drugs, people have mental health issues. It's 8 and 7%. It's a very, very small percentage of that's why you fall into housing. Very, very small percentage. Some of the things we see once you fall into homelessness, the struggles that many people have. We've talked about this, just the trauma of living on the streets every day, not knowing where you're going to stay, not knowing where you're going to eat, all that stress, all those challenges. We have a place where, like we talked about earlier, people can hang out during the day. You would be shocked at the number of people who just come there and sleep. Just find a chair, put their head back, and sleep because they haven't slept all night. And so there's that. We talked about that leads to the substance use. The instability it creates in your life, again, not knowing where you're going to be day from day. How do you get your kid to school? How do you get to work? How do you get to work when you haven't showered? How do you get to work when you haven't washed your clothes? How does your kid successful in school when he does not have clean clothes, right? All those things that you just don't know. And again, along with that, just the stress of just the normal everyday things that you don't get to do, right? I need a shower. Right now, for me, my laundry is running right now, right? I'm going to go home, and that's one of my responsibilities in the household is laundry. I'm going to go home. I'm going to put the Sunday night football game on, and I'm going to fold laundry, right? I can do that. There are a number of people, right, who don't have that opportunity, and they don't. And I will say this because it's prominent coming up now. All this stuff gets exacerbated at this time of year with the weather. Because you think sleeping in your, quite frankly, there's sometimes you could say my son thinks sleeping in the car when it's August out is cool. Do you think sleeping out in the backyard when August is cool? Sleeping out in the backyard or sleeping in the car on November when it's raining and it's cold is not. And so during this time of year, everything gets exacerbated and people really start to struggle. As we talked about, we have free laundry facilities. It's been a pretty wet weekend for us. We'll see we'll see 4 or 5 people walk into our agency at the start of the day and ask just to dry stuff. Just to dry stuff. Ways that people can get back to housing and pathways that we see. One, shelters really matter. It allows families to get stabilized. It allows individuals to get stabilized, have a place to go, have a place to keep their stuff, and then, you know, either maintain their job or get jobs, save some money, get into a new place. Moving costs. One of the things I talk about when I go out, the biggest barrier to people who are living on the street is moving costs. Again, I think of what I paid for a down payment on my first house decades ago. It is what you need to move into a 2-bedroom apartment right now. You know, I sometimes, I have discussions with my parents or my parents' friends, and they'll talk about what they paid for their first car, and I'll think, you'd have to buy 9 cars to get into housing, to get into a 2-bedroom right now. And so those moving costs are really important to get people in. Obviously, more affordable housing we are just, quite frankly, in a supply and demand problem, and the real struggle is that you can't just build more housing quickly, right? You can't, it's not like the iPhone's flying off the shelves, we're just going to build more iPhones, or this car is very popular, you know what, we're just going to work on a couple Saturdays, and we're going to knock out another 600 cars, right? It takes a long time. We are building 26 apartment units right now. We broke ground on September 7th. Those 26 units will be open and ready for people to move in, hopefully by November 1st. This week will determine a lot about how much rain there is and how quickly the foundation goes in. So more affordable housing and just supportive systems to get people through is, like I said, what we see is a lot of people working, a lot of families doing the things that they need to do, but they just need some assistance getting there, whether that's, for us, one of the things we do a lot is pay for some car stuff, you know, so that that car can get to work every day, can get the kids to school every day, those kinds of things. As we look at what the federal government's talking about and kind of the programs they're looking to cut, a lot of those are the support systems that people use. That we've seen the struggle this month with food assistance, with some other stuff that assist families in paying for things so they can save that money and to get to housing. So what can you do? This is the stock end of my speech. I always say this has a lot, some of these things are LASA specific, but I will say if you want to get involved in this work with LASA, money always helps. Sadly, money makes the world go round, and so money always helps. Volunteering is things you can do. We do a lot of work with donations of hygiene products, housing supplies. Sometimes if you got furniture to get rid of, if we have a place that can quickly go, we'll take it. If we don't, we can tell you somewhere else to donate it to. I have a neighbor who came over yesterday, well, was playing soccer with my son, and they're like, we bought new dishes this week. I'm like, what are you doing with your old dishes? So now in my trunk, I got a box of dishes. But maybe the most important thing anybody can do in terms of long-term to help people get and stay housed is support affordable housing measures. That goes for affordable housing measures in the city of Lakewood, in Pierce County, and Washington State, and federally. We're not in a win-win, a lot of people say, here's a win-win situation. The government does this, people do that. It's a win-win situation. We are no longer in a win-win situation. We are in one of two things happens. We build a lot more housing, or we have a lot more homeless people. There is no in-between. And I understand, as I do this a lot, and I kind of live out a little further in the county, right, where people like to spread out, and I hear it all the time. I want to spread out. Why should 20 apartment units go 2 blocks away from me? Do you know how long it's going to take me to get out of my street when the school bus comes? Do you know how many people are going to be at the grocery store now? I don't want those 200 apartment units there, But you know what else I don't want? I don't want the person in an encampment at the park down the block either. Those two things are now incompatible. You only get one choice. You either build a lot more homes or a lot more living units, or you have more people who are homeless, and that's where we are. It took us decades to get here. It's going to take us decades probably to get out, because we do have to build a lot of housing units. And I will say this, as somebody who, for my first time, is becoming a developer, permitting stinks. And the hoops you have to jump through to build things really is a problem. I will say that. If you want to hook, I'll say this, if you want to hook up 26 units of affordable housing to the water system, it's going to cost you a cool $170,000. That's the check I'm writing tomorrow. And so there's a lot of hoops to jump through. But I think as you go through, if you want to make this a priority, part of it is not complaining when the city of Lakewood or Pierce County changes density requirements or says, for me, my wife sometimes will say, we have in our where we live, they're building about 200 houses down, and she's like, I miss those trees. I'm like, 200 houses. Goodbye, trees. And so we have that kind of push and pull with us. But so there you go. I was going to do questions, but we're going to do questions later. So I will not do that now.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is invite you all to take looking at the clock. I just got to make these events longer. A 5-minute break. Okay, go ahead and take 8. But use the restroom, eat some snacks. There is so much good food there. We don't want to throw it away. I don't want to have to take it all home. So if you would help me out by going and eating some snacks, I would appreciate that. So go and eat some snacks and then reconvene in here in 5 to 8 minutes, and we'll be ready for a panel discussion.
makes me laugh every time. And then Barbie will come up there and the same thing. I know they know who you are. He was up there for something. Oh, for the budget. Yeah, a couple weeks ago or something.
All right, it looks like most of our people are back in here, so if you're still grabbing snacks, I'm just going to invite you to come back. I am trying to do a much better job of a timely ending than last month. Lyle, you're just laughing at me. It hurts right here. No, but I'm going to invite our panel participants to come up, grab a seat, whichever you feel comfortable with, and then I have some pre-scripted questions, and then I was just scribbling a ton of notes as you were talking, Jason, and you were able to introduce yourself before, but Devin, would you introduce yourself and tell us what your role is, and why are you here tonight?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. Good evening, everyone. My name is Devin Isaacson, and I am the social service supervisor for Pierce County Human Services. And so what we do is we administer all of the state and federal funds as a pass-through entity to all of our homeless service providers in Pierce County.
So as a pass-through organization, you don't do any of the direct services yourself. You're getting the resources to the people doing the direct resource.
That is 100% correct.
Okay. Yeah, I like to make sure. So a little bit of my background too. I'm pastoring here, but I came up from Portland about a year ago. And in Portland, I was the director of a nonprofit that did a lot of direct services on the streets. And so in this sort of realm of discussion, I'm somewhat familiar. And so some of my questions may be skewed by Portland data as well. I think one of my first questions is, Jason, you threw out a whole lot of numbers, but numbers don't help us understand the human element. And so even as we're talking about affordable housing, I guess I want to try to challenge either one or both of you to, can you move it from numbers to a story? Can we paint a picture of a face of a family to try to humanize it a little bit more?
Yeah, so one of the places we have somebody living, right? And I think for us, for what we do at LASA, and for me specifically, and this is how Devin and I know each other a long time, as we did a lot of youth work back in the day together, but it's been a long time now. Okay. Anyway, one of the biggest issues for children is if you stay in the same school or the same school district for your childhood, like your performance at school goes way, way up, right? And that opens up employment opportunities, continuing education opportunities. It makes a huge, huge difference in your experience and where you're going to be when you're 30 or 40 or 50 years old. And so the one I'll use that's for us recently, right, is we have some affordable housing units where people live, and we have a family who's been there now 6-7 years, and a young woman who in late elementary and middle school was really struggling, had a huge problem. She's now been with us 6 years. She's going to graduate in the spring. She's going to graduate on the honor roll. She's going to graduate. She's doing I'm going to forget the name of it, when you're the young person with the police department doing that.
Explorer?
Yeah, she's doing that, which has led to a scholarship for post-secondary education, right? Now she is going to kind of have the world at her fingertips over the next 5 or 6 years if she takes advantage of those opportunities, which, trust me, she is the kind of person that's going to take advantage of those opportunities because she has. And so that's, I think, to me, really the biggest thing is that, and I don't have the numbers on this either, but the number of people who experience homelessness, who really experienced housing instability as a young person versus now as an adult, like, it's a high number. And so this young lady went from somebody who probably looked like, when she was 10, she probably looked like she was going to spend the vast majority of her life homeless, and instead, because she got a stable place to stay, she's probably going to be a person that, when she's 30, somebody looks at it and says, that's somebody who's really successful and doing really well for themselves and has got everything that they need.
Yeah. You mentioned the point-in-time survey, and that being counted as literally homeless or in the car or in a shelter. And this is just for my own clarity, trying to understand. So the work when I was in Portland, we worked with Portland Public Schools as well, and they counted anyone homeless that didn't have their own permanent residence. So if you were couch surfing, even though you weren't on the street, with the school system, you were still considered, this is a homeless student. Or if you were like you turned a garage into an apartment, right? It's not insulated, whatnot. But so you weren't necessarily on the street, but you didn't have your own home. And I think they even had a metric where if it was 3 or more kids sharing a room, that was considered. And so those are different metrics than the point-in-time metric. And can you talk about that disparity and what the impact of that is?
Yeah, so historically in homeless services, there hasn't been a large focus on prevention services. Prevention services could be for those families, McKinney-Vento families, I'm sure you've heard that term before, for folks that are couch surfing or don't have a formal lease in their name. It's only been probably in the last 10 years that you're starting to see programs that are helping folks before they become literally homeless. But to your question, the point-in-time count is just for the visible homelessness that we see on the streets every day. It's for folks that you see that you can identify that they're living in their vehicles, folks that are living in encampments, whether in urban areas or in rural areas, and then those folks that are literally sleeping in an emergency shelter that night. So there's a big distinction, but I think the important thing that I would say about that is you don't solve or reduce homelessness unless you address each continuum of that experience. Jason talked a lot about the 17,000 folks that have called the system to say, I need help. A lot of those folks are folks that are just in danger of becoming homeless. And I think there has to be funds and programs at each one of those steps along the way, because otherwise you're not going to reduce homelessness significantly. So I think that we want to see folks in encampments move to housing, but talking about families, and it's 50% more likely, by the way, to experience homelessness if you're homeless as a young person. I think it's really important that we really hone in and focus in on that intervention strategy and what that looks like for our community.
Yeah. Is the Pierce County, like, is there a label for that, like at risk of being houseless, or what's the jargon being used in this area?
Yeah, so this is going to get way too in the weeds, but HUD, Housing and Urban Development, has definitions. So you've got literally homeless, imminent risk of homelessness. There's a third one, which is like by other federal statute, and then fleeing domestic violence. So those are your categories, and Pierce County recognizes all 4 of those categories, but the majority of resources go into number 1 and number 4, which is the literal and the fleeing domestic violence.
Right. So you were talking about this, people reaching a point like rent goes up and now, or an accident. We used to, with a lot of the shelter workers in Portland, our assessment from case studies was that people were sort of one accident and three, if you're overhoused, if you're drastically overhoused, right, so you're paying more than that 30%, you're in that closer 50 or higher percent, you're sort of one accident and 3 months away from being homeless, literally homeless on the street. And you were talking about that, you know, so the rent goes up. Can you share a little, like, what is the stages? So now I'm rent, I can't afford my rent, I pack up and move out because I don't want an eviction on my record. Where do I go from there? Like, what's the progression typically? And I know each story is different to me panhandling on the corner.
So I think in the conversation we were having in between, Devin, I think, mentioned it well when it comes to youth. I think what we see a lot is that I've lost my housing because, one, I had a bad accident or I lost my job, right? And sometimes it takes a while, right? And that's, if you pay attention to the city of Tacoma, they've created all these rental codes that keep people housed, which that's another discussion to go down because there's some really good things, there's some really detrimental things in that as well. But anyway, a lot of times what happens is, okay, I've now missed a couple rent payments, right? My landlord's evicting me. A lot of people will try to get out before that eviction happens because you get that eviction on your record. It is near impossible to get the next place to stay. But then it becomes, how do I access my resources in my community? It means I'm staying with my brother for however long he has me, right? Which, you know, goes to the thing you had, like, now I've got a 2-bedroom unit and I got 2 families, you know, with 2 kids each living in that. And until that blows up, and then I'm going to my friend, my other friend, my cousin, and sometimes it may be you lose your place your lease is in your name. It may be 6 months sometimes before you're in your car, right? Because you're like, I went and stayed with them, I went and stayed with them, I went and stayed with them. We see a lot of, too, is that especially when you're working, I can get a hotel for the weekend, and then I go stay with friends. We've got a place across the street from us, right, it's an Airbnb, and basically he takes payment by the day. He's got 4 rooms, and we got people they get their paycheck, they stay there till they run out of money. Usually it's 2 or 3 days. They're in their car, then they get their money, then they're back to Airbnb and from this guy who owns 3 or 4 homes in Lakewood. I don't know how I feel about him yet, but it's not going the right way. But so it kind of becomes that kind of thing where it can be a really slow process in a lot of ways. And there can be, to Devin's point, a lot of interventions in there that get somebody back to where they need to be. Again, the challenge is, how do you save that money to get into units? And that's what we see, again, is just the biggest challenge is once you lose your place, it is so hard to get the money together for the next place because those moving costs are astronomical, and God forbid you have a pet, because that's another $500 on top of that. It can be a real challenge.
So for Pierce County, has there been studies on, so I lost my job, I've been on the streets for a year, but I'm deciding I want to change my circumstances. I got a job making whatever, part-time, minimum wage, and I'm determined to change my circumstances. And so I call LASA, hey, I have a part-time job, I'm making blah, 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 I don't want to be houseless anymore, and poof, the next day they're unhoused, right? They just made that choice and it happened. What's the timeline typically from someone really deciding to do the work to reaching that unhoused spot in Pierce County?
It is a long timeline. It is a long timeline, because as much as LASA can provide some financial assistance, a lot of that comes through the work that Devin does with the county. Some of it is money we get from other donors and stuff like that. Some of it is so LASA currently has, I would say that just somebody who walks in off the street and talks to us, we currently have, I'm gonna have to do some math here, 7 minus 15, 22. 22 apartment units that we rent out at an affordable rate is what I would say. Like, we have a 2-bedroom just outside of Lakewood that's $850, right? And it's a pretty nice place. And in fact is getting a new roof next week. And so we can do that, and we're only going to expect, all we need is a deposit of your month's rent. We're not looking for first, last deposit. We're just saying, give us the deposit, pay your rent when you get in. It is really, really difficult because it is really expensive, and like, we don't have those kind of dollars that we can come up with $3,000, $4,000 on a regular basis to get people there. A lot of it is, how do you save it, and what other resources can you access? There's also a number of churches locally that you can go through that we send people to that are like, you get 300. I mean, this is what a lot of people we work with do. You go to this church and you get 300. You go to that church and you get 400. You go to this organization and you get 250, and you come to us and we'll be able to do 200, right? And that's how you do it. But it takes a long time, and not every church and not every place has that money each time. And, you know, sometimes the time it takes you to get that unit's gone as well. So it can be a long process doing the right thing. So we have a gentleman who came and hung out every day in our service center, had a job for 4 months, slept in his truck every night, came and did his laundry and all that stuff with us and spent some time living with us. Had a job that probably many of you use that service all the time, and you never look at that guy or somebody in that job and think they'd ever be at risk. Took him 4 months to save up the money to get a place to live. The other challenge is, too, is if you have an eviction on your record, they expect you to pay that money back, right? So you get evicted, you miss 2 months of rent before you leave, and that's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. You kind of got to pay that back before a landlord will talk to you about letting you in as well. So a lot of times it is you are paying for what happened a year ago before you can get to where you need to be now.
Yeah. In Portland, we had figured out it was about 3 years. If you decided to get off because again, the unit, like, you had to get your evictions expunged, you had to find the right documentation. If you've been living on the street, you've lost your documentation, it's gotten wet, you got to go to this service, to that service, and all that transportation. It usually took someone working diligently for 3 years and waiting on the wait list in order to get off the street from making that decision.
I would just add that for those folks that are literally living on the street, I mean, the amount of work that goes into staying alive, staying fed, staying warm, and then you add all of those barriers on top of it, documentation, do you have a job, are you struggling with substance use disorder, like, that's really what makes things feel hopeless to folks, because when you're just trying to survive, thinking about calling 47 churches or going to them, because that's the only way, I mean, it's a full-time job to experience homelessness, and then it's a full-time job to try to get out of experiencing homelessness. So it's a challenge. That these are folks that really need the support of organizations, of the faith community. Like, they need support in order to get into a different situation.
Yeah, we, over the last couple of months since we've started these Justice and Mercy talks, we, somehow it's like when people start knowing, like, oh, you guys are doing Justice and, like, our door we've had more knocks on the door, and we've entered into some lengthy conversations with individuals who are both in the car at this point or at risk of losing. And one of their frustrations is that a lot of the places that they're referred to that does housing assistance doesn't actually offer any assistance. They just do this intake process and then give them other numbers to call. So how many, I mean, and I know you can't necessarily put a number on it, but for someone to, like, now I have to, like, I'm trying to work, I'm trying to move, I'm riding the bus to get to a part-time job, I'm want my stuff while I'm at my part-time job because I don't have the secure home, and now I just wasted 2 hours going to this meeting for them to give me a list of phone numbers to call, and they don't actually do anything to provide help. Like,
So-
what's
So, I mean, there's one critical problem, and that is there's not enough funding for everybody. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I'll give you some numbers. So, we have what's called the priority pool, which is a list. It changes every day. It scores people based on their vulnerability. So, depending on disability status or different things, I'm going to have a higher score and be higher on that list. And that list is what determines a housing referral. So if I get into a permanent supportive housing unit or I get into a program, that's what's going to determine whether I get a referral or not. That list is typically 1,500 people on any given day, and 5% of those people get a housing referral. So it's not a matter of we need you to call these other resources. The reason that they're being told that is because the reality is there's not enough resources for everyone. So when someone goes in to do an assessment, that's the conversation. Is there an option for you to do this on your own? If there is, we can find you some resources. If there isn't and you have to wait for housing, it's going to take a while. Pierce County recently did a little bit of an analysis on our housing crisis response system, and it would cost about $500 million a year to get everyone in housing. What do we spend annually right now? About $50 million. We are so far off the mark that sometimes it feels a little bit frustrating, right?
I will say for LASA, so we probably, and we call it rental assistance, right? But we, this year, between a bunch of different places, probably had close to $100,000 of what we call rental assistance. And we use it for a number of things. Moving costs for people, paying back rent for people, paying, just things that help you stay housed. Like we'll hey, I got a car. This is a popular one for us. I drive for Uber. I do DoorDash. This is the way I make my money. I got 2 flat tires. I'm not going to be able to make my rent next week, right? Like, we'll buy you the tires, right? Those are the kinds of things we do for people. We had maybe, in 2025, we're probably going to have access to maybe $100,000 for that. If we wanted to in 2025, we could have got rid of the $100,000 probably the second week in terms of ask from people. And so, like, we try to string it out. And one of the things that we talk about as an organization, because this is what I feel terrible about, if you call on a Tuesday in May, sometimes you get it. If you call the following day, you may not get it. It is when the check from the funder clears. It is when somebody else, we had that money allocated to somebody else and their stuff fell through. It is, I'll be honest with you, I had a staff member get a job at a different place, and now I had some salary dollars that I didn't need for a month, right? It's those kinds of things that make the difference, and it is, quite frankly, dumb blind luck sometimes for us. Like I said, we own 22 units of affordable housing. We really try to put people in those units that are people that access our services, and some people come to us every week for 9 months and don't get it, and then they stop coming, and then 2 days later somebody comes in for the first time, and now the person's getting ready to move out. We're like, you're at the top of the list. And it's quite frankly, it's the worst part of what we do, and it's the worst part of my job. I tell people, because we have interns every year from Clover Park Technical College, and they always ask, what's the worst part of the job? I said, you're going to say no a lot. Like, you are going to say no so many times. And it is depressing, and it is why a lot of people leave the work, is because you say no 100 to 150 more times than you say yes to a family.
Yeah, so again, I'm newer to this area and I don't have the resource network that I had in my previous city knowing everyone to call. So when we do get a knock on our door, the phone rings, I tell them at this point, oh, you need to call LASA. And that's, you're the only number I got right now. What are other resources other than, hey, call LASA? I mean, I've told them, like, call Jason, tell him Steven sent you, use my name. I don't know if that helps. Steven who?
So we do have a coordinated system that people can start the process or start the journey of trying to find stable housing or re-stabilize their housing. It's called the Coordinated Entry System. You can access it a couple different ways. The easiest way is to call 211. They will ask you a series of questions to identify the sort of resources that you need, and then they will set you up with what we call an assessment, which is essentially an interview to ask you questions. They're intrusive questions, right? But they're questions that determine your level of vulnerability to see your eligibility for potential permanent housing, right? It is the best way to access the most or the majority of services that are available in the system. LASA is amazing and does a lot of things, but they may be tapped out. And if that's the case, then you would want to forward them to 211.
And that's the 17,500 number that we gave, is that coordinated entry system. And I will say this, and well, Devin's heard me say this before when we worked together, but now as the person who holds this purse strings to my dollars, I don't know if I want her to hear this, right? You need to lie. You need to lie in that system because they ask a lot of stuff. And if you say, I'm couch surfing, you're never getting help, right? So you need to tell people, which I know you told people back in the day as well. So you need to say it. No, I slept in my car. You know, and they're like, I don't own a car. I don't care. Tell them you slept in a car. Tell them you slept in a tent. But don't tell them you slept in a house. You'll never get help, right? And it is like the people who are in the worst spots get the help, and those people on the brink and those people who are, on the brink that don't. They're going to wait in line forever because of what Devin said. The resources aren't there. The resources aren't there.
So the bigger question, I want to try to final this down to a wrap up, and people can ask you questions one-on-one afterwards too. But if for a small congregation like ours, or just individuals, we don't have a large bank account. Sometimes there's this myth like, oh, you're a church, therefore you have endless sums of money. It's like, well, we have utilities and we have, we're doing the best we can, but what can a small group do, or what could an individual do that can actually make a difference? That's tangible, that's not just throwing money away, and sometimes we do things, this is just the reality. Sometimes we want to find a way to help just so we feel good. It's a and then there's sacrificial help, there's deeper help, but sometimes I just want to feel like I did something, but how do we go beyond that? What's something we could tangibly do that would actually help?
I have two examples, and then I'll turn it to you so that you can take advantage that this is Lakewood. Tell folks what you need. So there's two things that are top of mind for me. The first one is volunteer for the point in time count. It's an opportunity for you to connect with people that are experiencing homelessness in your community and hear their story and give out resources to them. We do the point in time count in January. It's during the coldest part of the year. We hand out blankets, jackets, sleeping bags, food, hygiene supplies. We're really trying to get as much out in the community as we can.
Okay, how do I do that? Put me on that list.
Okay.
I love walkabouts.
Okay, yep. And then the second thing that comes to mind, well, I have a third, but that's based on your comment about all your space downstairs, so I won't put you on the spot with that today. But my second one is, think about maybe utilizing your amazing building for something like inclement weather support when the weather is super cold. Selling it, right? That could be as simple as having your space open during the day when the weather's going to be 32 degrees or colder and people just need a place to come for a couple hours and warm up. Living outdoors, obviously, in very cold weather, which we're anticipating this year, is life-threatening. right? So those were the two top of mind, and then if you ever want to convert your downstairs area to housing, just let's have a
Well,
conversation.
so with cold weather shelters, because I've been a part of running those in the past as well, or even overnight shelters, they can be very volunteer intensive. And so while we have a great building, we do not have a lot of human resources. If we have a aging congregation with mobility challenges, which limits some of the volunteering. So if we were even willing to do that, like, is there broader help to find the staffing for the volunteers to that and not have to come up with it all on our own?
There is.
Okay.
So a couple of things. We had 30 days of very cold temperatures in January and February, beginning of this year. And the county did a couple things. They partnered with nonprofits that already have, staff that are able to come on site, put in their time. They're also experienced, right? They work with folks that are experiencing homelessness all the time. And they were able to give their time on the nonprofit's dime, which is funded by Pierce County. And then the other thing that the county did is we utilized contract staff. So we paid contract staff. We asked for a W-2 or W-9 and then paid them out of funds that we had available through the county, security staff included. So if you had a building like this and you have a lot of folks identified in Lakewood, which I think you do, this would be a great space to do something like that.
So some small things people can do, right? And one, the point in time count is a big one. I will double down on that, because how many people you count is how many federal dollars you get, right? So the more people you have counting, the more money that comes into the system, the more it can help people do things. I think some simple things you can do. We have a congregation somewhere else locally who does backpacks, right? And those backpacks have a coat, some supplies, like a tarp, some of those things, and we just, every once in a while we get 10 backpacks. We give those backpacks out. It makes a big difference for those people who get the backpacks. Stuff like that. For us, whatever it is, you can go to an organization like LASA or other organizations to say, what are just some things that you give out on a regular basis that would be helpful for people that don't have a place to stay? I think those are easy things to do instead of buying, on Black Friday, right? Sometimes instead of buying one thing, you buy two things, right? And just do that, and a group can do that. I think the other thing is being very active politically, right? And some of that is, how do you energize people to go and vote what's best for the community and to put pressure on politicians for what's best in the community? I talked about it earlier. In Tacoma, they call it the Landlord Fairness Code. There are some great things that really help people staying housed in that code. There's some unintended consequences of some of the things they've done in that code that really cause problems. And so it's not perfect, but that's an example of a community getting energized and going and making real change. If you can go, in this case, to the city of Lakewood, when they have things at the city council that penalize homelessness, that in the phrase we use a lot, criminalize homelessness. Now, literally, if you do not have a place to sleep, you are now a criminal in most of Pierce County. You can be arrested, you can be put in jail solely because you don't have a place to live, right? And so going to the city of Lakewood and saying, hey, when these things come up and these discussions come up, speaking up on the behalf and saying, hey, it's not right to do this, or where can we put some of our dollars in to make this happen, right? And so this is something that's happened that's come up big in the last, when was grants passed, 2 years ago? 2 years ago, it's really changed. Some of the laws and a Supreme Court decision has really changed the way jurisdictions can criminalize people who are sleeping in public areas. And so just being active with your local elected officials about what can make a difference. Because quite frankly, and for sure 20 years ago I didn't believe this, but I believe it wholeheartedly now, city councils matter a ton in the terms of the way decisions are made about how people live and survive in a community. Again, there are local jurisdictions and local communities here that they will do everything in their power not to put affordable housing in their community, right? They will do everything in their power not to allow a shelter in their community. There is not, LASA has 3 family shelter units, 2 apartment units in Lakewood and 1 apartment unit in Spanaway. We are the only real shelter in the city of Lakewood, and it is 3 units. And so things like that you can do locally, put pressure on people when these things come up, because they listen. I will tell you this, they listen. I go to a lot of county council, city council, all that kind of stuff. You'll think something's gonna pass with flying colors, and 5 people come up and get angry about it, and all of a sudden, like, I never see it on another city council meeting again. And so that stuff really matters, and it's not something where, because affordability is a struggle for everybody right now, and so even doing stuff like packing or buying supplies can be a burden on a household. Giving your time and saying to an elected official, saying this is wrong, or this is what it should be, is something you can do fairly cheaply as well, and makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and those poverty crimes make it harder, because now I have something on my record. So now I'm trying to apply for housing or apply for a job, and it becomes a cycle. There was even, like, why do so many homeless people throw garbage on the street? First of all, there's a lot of house people who litter like crazy. That bugs me. I'm a tree hugger. But if you were to go to a fast food restaurant and throw your garbage in their garbage, that is considered private property, and now you can get a trespassing charge for throwing your garbage in a company's dumpster.
They want those things like a hawk.
And there are a few specific companies who they're mandated from corporate that they don't want it, they aren't going to tolerate it, and they are to prosecute every case that they can. And all it is someone trying to not litter, because they don't have the privilege of an address and a dumpster and a service. And then that becomes even more profounding. Are there any questions from people in the room? I'm going to borrow just one of these because I didn't set up another mic.
This is kind of like a city/county planning question, but I have a feeling that you might know something about it, and I'm really curious. You were talking about building, building the units that you guys are building, and then the units that are going in, like across from your personal home. We were doing food insecurity last month, and I was thinking about food deserts, and when you are in that planning process of building those affordable houses or affordable units, what is the process for making sure that not only is there a process for making sure that not only do the people have a house, but they also have access to food, because that's incredibly important as well.
So every jurisdiction in Washington has to have this thing called their comprehensive plan, which basically puts it all together, right? Is that this place can have multi-family units, right? Apartment complexes, and it can because it has these resources around it, right? And you can build this many homes over here because it can support it with all these things. And so that's the way that comprehensive plan is supposed to work. Now, what I'll say is, the way it really works is this, is that places where people don't vote get multifamily units put in there, whether they have grocery stores or not, because they're not going to hear complaints from their constituency. And the state requires now that you basically have to have a plan to meet the population needs in the future, right? And so they will, it's why, quite frankly, it's why these food deserts happen, is because in low-income places where people don't vote, you can put affordable housing in these places because nobody will complain, right? Whereas you can, in certain parts, and I don't want to single out Lakewood here because it's the same everywhere. If you're following the news, Tacoma Rescue Mission's putting a big tiny home village out in the Spanaway area, right? And they have a very large vocal group that has really slowed it down. They haven't stopped it, but they've really slowed it down, right? And that's why a lot of those places don't get multifamily units and stuff like that, is because that constituent votes, they donate to people, and they're like, we want affordable housing, just nowhere that I'm going to drive by. And we want more. My wife grew up in Lakewood. They literally had a letter in their little local newsletter from somebody who said, we live in Lakewood because Lakewood is Edgewood, because Edgewood is a single family community, not a multifamily community. So we should get on our politicians about allowing multifamily units to be here, because we all know this is a single family community. We know and it says in there, I know multifamily units are important for housing and we should have them, but Edgewood is a single family housing community, and we need to make sure that's known. Right? Now, they're not going to have a food desert. They're not going to have any of that. And quite frankly, they put up a lot of apartments in Edgewood, which is why this letter was written. But realistically, it's something that should be paid attention to, and planning commissions and planning groups do pay attention to it. But what actually happens, I think, is two different things. And Devin's known me long enough to know I get a little bit cynical about things. These comprehensive plans are great, but if this jurisdiction doesn't follow them, what happens to them? Absolutely nothing.
So I'm going to summarize your answer. It should, but politics. Any other questions? Lyle.
All right, you talked about having affordable housing units. Would you describe what an affordable housing unit is?
Yeah, so I'll say two things about affordable housing. One, our community needs housing at every income level. Part of the reason we struggle is because people who make over $100,000 a year can't find a home to buy. People who make $250,000 a year can't find a home to buy, which then means they rent, which means they drop. So we need housing at every level. I mean, sadly, I can't believe I'm going to say this publicly, right? We need people to build $1 million homes. We need people to build $500,000 single-family homes. We need people to build 500-unit multifamily complexes. Affordable housing in this is based on income level that you make. And so it's based off a thing called the annual median income, and I am going to forget it exactly, but for Pierce County and Lakewood, the annual median income, which basically is de facto average, but not exactly average, right? The annual median income is roughly somewhere low 90s. So about, I think it was like $93,000 last time I looked, maybe. So that's pretty close. That's within $5,000. $93,000 is the annual median income. So like the units we're buying is the households there make 50% or less. So we're talking about families that are making $45,000 a year. They're going to be able to move in those units. And then we charge a much lower rate. So, for example, for us, because we get funding to build these units, we got funding from the city of Lakewood, Pierce County, the federal government, thank you, Marilyn Strickland, the state of Washington, thank you, Mari Levitt. We got funding for it. And so, like, for the we're building 2 and 3 bedrooms. 3-bedroom units, the most we're going to charge is $850 a month at the start, right? There's some 2 bedrooms, depending on your income level, that are going to be $400 a unit, but it is dependent on how much you make compared to that median income, right? So, like I said, the median income which is shocking to think about, basically the average income in Lakewood is over $90,000 a year per household. That's a lot. Let me rephrase that. I used to think that was a lot. That's before a home was $500,000. But and so when we say affordable housing, one, I think just building more housing is important. I think one thing we've moved away from the idea of low-income housing, because you think if somebody makes $50,000 a year, that's not low income. I don't think most people think of that as a low-income family making $50,000 a year. But technically, they got a couple kids. Federally, they'd be low income. And I will say this more on the income level, too, is Habitat for Humanity does incredible work. They allow families to buy homes and own those homes and get into home ownership. But does anybody know the minimum income you need to make to be eligible to get into a Habitat for Humanity home? Yep, it's a little over $60,000 a year is what you need to make to afford a Habitat home. Think about that right now. Like, that's, to me, is a shocking thing when you think about how many people do not make $60,000 a year. They do amazing, wonderful, incredible work with home ownership, and you still have to make $60,000 a year to afford one of their homes to be eligible.
Follow-up question? Yeah. All right. Yeah, and so with the income piece too, we were talking earlier that like that 30% is what you should be less than. So if the average is 93, then your housing to be considered affordable would be 31,000 for the year or less would be affordable if you're making 93. If it's more than that, it's not considered affordable or you're overhoused at that point. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and wrap up there. They're going to linger for a little bit. I also want, if you want to stick around, I will show you our space. If we do a little bit of a tour and thinks, we are thinking what we can do with space. But if you have questions you want to ask one-on-one, for our congregation, I'm going to encourage you. We are hoping that through these talks, your gears will start to turn. And you'll start to ask questions like, well, what if? Would it be possible if? And at this point, we're saying, with no commitments to anything, every question goes, could we bulldoze the entire church and build affordable housing? Well, let's ask it. I'm not committing to, don't go to the hospital for heart palpitations. But we are open to asking questions to begin to wonder, what can we do with our space to be the best stewards of this property and this land that God has entrusted us with? And if it means building affordable housing, then let's start asking those questions. If it means building a food next to an apartment complex, let's start asking those questions. And nothing is off the table, because who knows when we get to the right question, like, oh, this is possible. We do have the resources to do this. This would be amazing, but we don't know until we drill down and we just ask ridiculous questions also. So get the gears throwing, talk with one another. We do have a whiteboard out there, and if you have some of those, like what if, would it be possible, we're asking people to write down some of those things and those questions that you're beginning to gather, and hopefully through a sifting process, we're going to figure out the best use for our space and resources. Thank you both for coming and sharing. I think we've learned a lot. I have tons more questions. I feel like I could just do this for 2 or 3 hours, but they probably can't. So thank you very much, and thank you for those who are online. Please eat snacks and take snacks home with you.
And if you want to stay in touch, I got cards. I can give you my card and we can talk.
I don't have cards because only old people have cards.